Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging. On this show, we look at what it means to age in America and in other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. Today, I am pleased to welcome Margaret McDonald to the conversation. Margaret is an award-winning writer, a speaker, and a pro-aging advocate. She authors a blog at her website, growingandolder.com, where she's currently focused on tiny essays she calls 100 words on everyday ageism. Margaret is also the inventor and wordsmith behind the Aging is Living poster and yard sign, a project that provides free artwork to anyone who wants to share positive messaging about aging. In all of her work, Margaret says her goal is to help people live unencumbered by ageism. I've had the joy to meet and work with Margaret through the American Society of Aging and the Old School Hub. And Margaret, you're just a dear friend, so welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. It's great to be here with you, and I consider you a dear friend too.
And just a reminder that this podcast series is sponsored by the Center for Abundant Aging. Learn more about the center, including our annual symposium in October. You can visit www.abundantaging.org. So as we get started, I usually begin by asking our guests about their journey into this aging space. What has brought your attention and passion to center on people in later life?
It really started with being out of work in my late 40s. And I went out looking for work in my late 40s, and where I've always applied to jobs that I was highly qualified for. Always went smoothly, always went well. And suddenly it was crickets. I really was not hearing back from people at all. And from my point of view, the only thing that had changed is I have even more experience than I did before. But of course, my age was higher. I had a higher number in my age. And I started recognizing all those things that I've been hearing about ageism and about employers not wanting experience necessarily, that they really are all true. And I started sort of digging into it at that point, looking into what are people saying about ageism. And it was several years later, actually, that I heard about Ashton Applewhite's book, This Chair Rocks, picked it up and read it, and I read it so slowly, I wanted to sort of memorize every fact and every fantastic quote, and it's not possible because there's way too much information there. And it really cracked my mind open to the ways that we have so many misunderstandings about what aging is and how harmful and painful that really is. And so I started getting deeper and deeper into learning more about ageism. I found the Frameworks Institute online. It was actually a long time ago. They had some videos going and things like that. Studied that a bit. In one job that I had, I started an older employees resource group, which was fascinating and interesting. We didn't get very far along before pandemic hit. Everybody was working from home. Nobody was getting together. And then I actually moved on from that job to another one in late 2020, and I put older adults into my job search term at the time, thinking, wouldn't it be great if my job was actually involved in this as well? And I did get hired by a wonderful nonprofit. It's called Hadley. We work with older adults experiencing vision loss. And so my very work is in on this world of ageism, where we find that I think the numbers are something like 70% of people who are legally blind are over the age of, 55 or 60, whereas 90% of funding goes to children. And so we see how that plays out. And since then, I have just been getting more and more involved in writing and speaking and meeting people. And like you said, the American Society on Ageism and Old School Hub, and just learning more and trying to share information.
The American Society on Aging, who addresses ageism.
Did I say American Society on Ageism? That's not the first time I've thought of it that way. Yeah.
So, what's really interesting for me, Margaret, is your journey because you really have come to this from your own personal experience. And this isn't necessarily a direct part of your work, and that you're not working in senior services or in the more common fields and for folks who are addressing this. But I know that you love words and you have an editor's brain. Um, so how do you deal with that when you see or you hear things that trigger that editor's aspect of your thinking? Um, how do you go about then making suggestions or reference, trying to prompt changes in what you're seeing and hearing?
That is the hardest part. I wish I was that magical person who, when you hear an ageist joke or you hear an ageist remark, I always have just the right comeback. I am very much a word nerd. I always have been. My background has always been in editing and writing, and I just hear it all the time. I hear it on blogs. I read it. People laugh when they mention age almost every single time. People talk about the basic idea that young is good and old is bad. I heard on a blog recently, younger people are full of youthful energy and moving forward, and older people are looking in the rearview mirror. And I thought, what? Says who? Where did you come up with that? I was on a walk yesterday, and somebody mentioned to a person who had joined this group, it was a meetup group, said, "Thanks for coming back. I'm so glad you came back, even though most of us here have gray hair." And I thought, what are you talking about? What does that have to do with not coming back to the group? And for me, it really is difficult to speak up in those moments. I think about it. Plus, I don't want to embarrass anybody in front of other people. I think about it and tend to go back to people and say, "Oh, you know what? I have this idea. When you said this, it made me think about that." One thing is, that old adage that nothing bad happens to writers, it's all material. So at least now, every time I hear or see something like that, I think that's an essay. I can write that up and talk about it. And then I discovered that of course I have built a reputation for that. I share things with coworkers and people I know, and people are always sending me things saying, "Oh, I saw this and I thought of you." And then I write back and say, "Oh, that's fantastic. I hope you're sharing it with other people as well."
So, I am just in awe. I admire this journey that you've been on, and it's been for more than a year, trying to write 100 words on ageism every day, almost every day, very often. And you would think that after a while you're repeating yourself, but I think part of it is testament to one, your ability to constantly look and listen and find these everyday ageism pieces, and then your ability to write succinctly about them. To write in 100 words is not easy. Says somebody who's used to preaching longer than maybe
Right.
others want to hear me. So I know that you did a roundtable conversation at the ASA conference this past spring. It was near the end of the conference. I saw you shortly afterwards, and you were really energized by that conversation. And I was really interested in our passing comment, and that's part of the reason why I called you and said, "Hey, let's do this podcast." What was what was the topic, and what was your intention to hosting that roundtable, and what was the direction that the conversation went?
The topic was, I think I called it, I'm not sure if I called it "Don't Believe What You Say About Aging," or if I said "Where Ageism Hides in Our Words." I speak kind of on both topics there. And I really had a long list of things that I wanted to talk about and bring up and tell people it's not just the nouns we use, and it's not even just the verbs we use, like saying aging to mean decline and things like that. I wanted to get deep into a number of different places, but I started by going around the table and asking people why they were there and what they were interested in. And over again, people were saying, "I've heard we shouldn't use the word seniors, but it's part of our name, or it's part of our audience, or I don't know what else to say. And it went around, it kept coming up, and people kept saying, I've heard we shouldn't use. And nobody seemed to know why that was. They only had heard this kind of word police, don't use that. So I ended up talking a bit, and Beth, I know you're familiar with the research out of Frameworks Institute, where they showed people a number of different words and asked them questions like, do you see this person as competent? Do you see this person as frail? And all of those questions. And the word senior, the phrase senior citizen came out on the bottom. People thought of it as least competent, most frail, in need of help. And senior was very low too. And that's really where it comes from. It's not that you can't or you shouldn't or it's a bad word. It is that when this word comes up, it brings up a lot of negative things in people's minds, at least in our culture. And what came out on top was older adult and older person. And so I really explained that, but it was surprising how much of the conversation stayed on that topic. I've presented on this topic before, and it got a little bit stuck on old and older, and people talking about not wanting to identify with old, and isn't there another word, which of course gets into, well, why do we need euphemisms to talk about being old or being older unless we automatically think it's a bad thing to be?
Yeah, and language changes all the time, and we know that, even regionally, there are differences about how these things are perceived as well. I was at a conference earlier this spring, and somebody was, I don't even, they weren't talking about this, but in their bio, as they came up to speak, the name of the organization that they worked for when they joined that organization was listed, and I think senior citizen may have been in the title. And then they said, and then it was mentioned that they have a new position. It's the same organization, but they renamed themselves to get away from senior citizen, and it may just now be senior in the title. And the person kind of began by saying, yeah, and now senior isn't necessarily the best word, so I wonder what we're going to change our name to next. And yeah, language changes all the time, and it just reminds me that even though we think we've been talking about this for a long time, there are a lot of people for this is a very new conversation, and they're just kind of getting into the conversation and realizing it. And I also want to talk about that word senior. I know that for some people, that word has absolutely no problem for them. I tell folks the last time I wanted to be a senior, I was 20 years old and looking at my last year in college. And I know that, in organizations, a senior can be a level within an organization, but maybe it's because I'm not very hierarchical as well. So we all have our reasons as in our attachments or disattachments or negative associations to words like senior. So we're never going to get it right all the time.
That's right. It does keep changing. One of the things that I've mentioned before is, if you look back, it's not that far to look back and see people talking about girls in the office. My girl will call you, or, talking about the girls. And it took a long time for that to change, and people had to get serious about it. But it is funny how it takes so long. And, now we use the word Black, we use LGBTQ, we've changed our use of pronouns, all according to speaking to people and speaking about people with more and more respect. We use the phrase, I've noticed that your organization used the phrase, people living with dementia. I was talking to somebody recently and said something about a mood disorder. And they said, I don't like to think of it as a disorder. It's experiencing depression, experiencing manic episodes. And I thought, we have learned so many ways to change our language. It's time to really focus deeply on how we haven't yet changed our language, but can change our language when we're talking about older adults.
Now, we all have our pet peeves, and you mentioned this, you alluded to this just a few moments ago, that you particularly are challenged when you hear people making jokes or laughing in reference to their own aging. and often that reference is followed by a giggle. And I just appreciate your observing that giggle kind of signals that aging it's ridiculous. Is this really your biggest pet peeve about ageism, or is there something else? Or are there other things?
Well, it's a huge one. I think they all peeve me. I mean, if I had a language police whistle, I would blow it a lot. Probably. I just like that. Although I'm understanding more and more, these changes happen slowly. But the thing about the laugh or the chortle, the giggle, is it happens so often. So often. Almost any time somebody says, I'm having a birthday, or I'm older than you, or remembering something in the past, it's like, oh, I used to have that record and I played it on my record player. And then people laugh as if that is a silly thing, as if it's, I must be absurd because I once listened to records on record players. I heard a podcast again, and Goldie Hawn was on this podcast, and she was talking about when she had won an Academy Award. And for some reason, she wasn't even at the awards, and she received a telegram telling her she got the award. And the way she said it is, she said, it was a telegram. And she made it sound so beautiful, such a wonderful memory. And even the people who were interviewing her, they kind of got into that spirit saying, oh, wow. And the truth is, it's so wonderful for us to remember nostalgia and to relive it with each other and all. And for us to be talking about, oh, I remember when I got that Elton John album and I just sat on the living room floor and listened to it and read the liner notes. And if people would just, oh, yeah, I remember that. That was fun. Or if somebody doesn't have that memory, talk about something else. But instead of laughing at it, to dismiss it, to say there's something wrong with you if you have a memory like that.
Yeah, and it can also be jarring. Somebody will make a reference to something they remember from a different era and then realize that there's another individual or individuals in the room who were not living in that period of time, and they may not they don't remember it in the same way if they're aware of it at all. And that can also be a really awkward moment then, because they're really kind of being ageist. That the people who weren't alive at the time, who don't have that memory, that's something that it's their fault, and that kind of highlights the age. So yeah,
that's true. Yeah, for somebody to come on and say, kind of give the impression that I'm smarter than you because I know about this thing that you don't know about. I feel like I see that less, but it's not a pleasant thing. It's not helpful to anyone.
Well, and it is helped by the fact that we can access a lot of older movies and older TV shows. So the generations who have followed may have some awareness of those actors or actresses or those shows. But speaking of, and also music, but speaking of those things, once we see ageism, we know about it. Sometimes we end up seeing it everywhere. And how has your awareness of ageism affected your ability to enjoy movies or series or TV shows?
It's so hard. It is so hard because it's amazing. A lot of writers have made sure they've taken racism out of their language. They've taken homophobia out of their language. They've taken sexism out of their language. But now it's like, well, who's left to laugh at? Let's laugh at the old people. And just even little things, where somebody says, oh, you don't need to cry about an old codger like me. And I think, oh, that's not helpful. But if somebody's going through a tragedy, then we can feel for everyone. Age does not matter. But yeah, I see some that I think this is so awful. It shouldn't be on TV. I tried to watch something the other night because I thought it would be research. It was about an older woman who was supposed to go to some sort of living situation, and it was supposed to be temporary, and all of the women she ran across there, they were just ridiculous caricatures. Absolutely ridiculous. There was sort of pantomime winking going on because, of course, if you're going to hint towards sexuality in an older adult, you've got to make it absurd and burlesque and the whole thing. You and I have talked about that TV series, A Man on the Inside, with Ted Danson, and they really did a good job in so many ways. But of course, I'm watching like a hawk, and I'd love to work for Hollywood and say, thank you for showing me the script. This is really good, and I've got a couple of notes. There was a scene where he's with his supposed daughter, and they're looking around the new place where he's going to live, and the director hands the paperwork to the daughter, not to the man who's going to live there. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if later they came around and said, did you notice she handed the paperwork to you? Just kind of bring it up and bring it out. So it is hard. I have watched the beginning of many shows and many movies and just thought, I can't stand it. I can't do it, even when I think it's going to be research.
Yeah. I know somebody who is working on a script. They're not in the industry, but they are working on a script for a series. And as they were telling them to me, I would go to say something like, I know, I will show this to you when I'm ready. So I may get credit at some point for being some kind of consultant, but
that's right. And I do think that's a place where a huge difference could be made. We do, as I was saying, we see so many things now. We see couples where the two people are not the same race. Absolutely normal. It's not a part of the story, or it's not brought out in some special way. We see couples that are same sex. It's just there, part of who people really are. And so if we can start seeing more and more intergenerational connections, people who are older, that their age is not a part of the plot. It's not something to laugh at. It's not, we need this older guy because we needed somebody to fall down the stairs. It's just normal people doing normal life.
I mentioned your 100-word challenge on your blog, Growing and Older. What have you learned from this daily exercise?
I have learned one of the things, I call it 100 words on everyday ageism. And that's kind of a play on words because there is everyday ageism, meaning the phrases and words and things people say that they just don't think about. It just seems normal. It just seems everyday. But also, if I am speaking to anyone or listening to a podcast or watching TV or anything like that, I'm going to hear ageism every day. And so it has kind of reminded me of that. There's a couple times even I have said, here's today's post. Here's the 3 that I heard today. And so I have definitely learned it's out there all the time. I've also learned, like you had said earlier, things repeat, things come around again. It's like, yep, there's that thing. I could write about people chuckling and giggling about age every day. I could just point out, and then it happened here, and then it happened there. And I do definitely revisit themes because they come back around, and I get feedback on my posts that even though it's like, yep, I've said this 4 times before, but I'm pointing it out here again. What else?
Thank you for counting.
Yeah. I've also learned that sometimes I think, because besides putting them on my blog, I put them on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Sometimes I think, oh, nobody's going to care about this one, but I wanted to get one out there. And I get a lot of feedback. Or I think, ooh, this one, I know people are going to speak up. And then it's crickets. We don't really know what other people are thinking about the same topic. But I do like getting them out there. And it's also helped me just sort of get my name out there so that people recognize there is a building movement. Here's one of the people. And then I can tag other people in a post and say, yep, there's more. Follow these people, learn more about ageism and how to recognize it and where to stop it.
Well, just that exercise of looking for it, that's one of my challenges when I do speaking for people is just take a day and keep track of how many times in the course of the day age has been referenced, whether in your interpersonal conversations, on TV and printed material, um, and and then go back and look at that list. And if you do it a day, then maybe do it for a whole week. And how many of those references really are ageist, and by that we mean the negative ways we think, feel, and act about someone based on how old we think they are. It's a really good exercise, and you just haven't ever stopped that exercise. And I'm very, I mean, I notice them, but I don't keep track of them on a daily basis. So you have your blog, and
You've got
then
my card.
you have your artwork. Share with us where this idea came from and where it's gone over the course of the past 5 years.
Well, I live in Portland, Oregon, and this is one of the towns where people are very politically active and want to share their opinions. And there are a lot of yard signs out on people's yards. And I would walk around my neighborhood a lot, and I would see things about Black Lives Matter. I see the Ukrainian flag. I see women belong in the resistance, and there's a picture of Princess Leia. Things about peace, love, immigrants, science, water, fresh water, clean air, all of that. And I thought, I see nothing about aging and ageism. And it wasn't too long before I thought, well, I can remedy that. And so I came up with, I borrowed a lot of these phrases. Aging is living, and age is not the problem. Ageism is the problem. People have been saying that for a long time. I added retirement is not a requirement, and every age is the right age. There's no such thing as too experienced. I'm particularly fond of longevity is the best thing to happen in ages, but nobody ever remarks on that one. So I put those ideas together and just thought of, let's put all those words out on a sign. I specifically chose that green background. It's like an old chalkboard, which I just love. Plus, I love green because it is about growth.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yep, it's a chalkboard and it's growth. And I reached out to a local company here. They're called Signs of Justice. It's a small company in Portland, and said, would you make these signs for me? And I got a little bit of seed money, actually from Old School, you know about Old School, and printed off the first, I think, 100, and have been giving them out freely. Then I put it on the back of my business card. Then I made my business card as big as the one you were holding up there. And I've put the artwork out there in Creative Commons, so anyone can download it. Anyone can download it from my website. You can get it at oldschool.info. And also people can order the yard signs. You can order a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. You can order a baby onesie with those words on it. But I'm hoping people will use it more and more and just get it out there, so that, imagine people just running across these words as often as they run across the rainbow flag, and just looking at these and saying, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. And I know you've used it at United Church Homes.
So this obviously is not a yard sign. It's a half-page card, and on the back of it is where we list all the resources for the Center for Abundant Aging. And I think I shared with you, I was visiting my mom earlier this spring, and because there were several of us in the house, and then I needed to use the bathroom, I went up into the bathroom off of her bedroom, and she has this card sitting on the counter of her bathroom, and it doesn't have the resources that her daughter's involved in. This is what she looks at every day. And I thought, how cool is that for us to be reminding ourselves that aging is living.
And in front of the bathroom mirror, that's a perfect place. And that's one of actually having that card is really helpful, because sometimes people will just say something about age and I say, oh, that's interesting. I'm actually an advocate, and I pull one out and hopefully give them away. People sometimes take them, and they sometimes say, oh, that's very nice. Somebody just the other day, out of the blue, mentioned I had given her a card in the past, and she said, could I have a few more? I would like to frame them and give them as gifts.
Wow.
I said, you bet you can.
Yeah,
of course
absolutely.
you can.
So Margaret had some of these yard signs printed, and she brought them from Portland, Oregon to the ASA conference in Atlanta, and she was trying to give them away, and she still had a few left. And I was walking by the table, and she's like, I don't really want to take these back to Portland. So I was looking for people who lived in the Atlanta area. Like, would you like a yard sign? And
We got it out there.
I think that our friend Greg took some, and yeah.
Yep. We did that in San Francisco as well, and it was great when you could. It was cheaper to check baggage, and I haven't been carrying them lately to conferences, just the postcards.
Postcards, much easier to carry. So as you think about the work that you're doing and the artwork on the blog and how you're using this in your everyday job, and recognizing that this is not a fast process, it's probably going to take a generation for us to make significant changes in the way our culture thinks about aging. What do you imagine the world could look like in 30 years related to ageism and aging?
Oh, that's a fun thing to think about, because I do have kids in their 30s, and that's one of my that's one reason I'm so interested. Like, this is a terrible thing that's happening now. People are hearing awful things about aging that are not necessarily true for each person. Plus, ageism itself just makes aging worse. And I think it's bad enough now. I wouldn't want my kids to have to get to 50 in a workplace and have somebody trying to push them out. It's really time to turn this around. So I really do think 30 years from now, like I was talking about in popular culture, on the movies and on TV, I really think that is one of the great places where we're going to see more turning around. Right now, I feel bad for actresses who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. If somebody offers, there just are not that many roles. And if somebody offers a job where you're going to be winking at somebody across the cafeteria, how are you going to say no to taking that job? But I think as people who are in their 50s now, in their 40s now, in their 30s now, as we're sort of aging into this and understanding more, people will have more power to say, I'm not doing that. You've got to rewrite this. This is a ridiculous idea. Just as terrible things used to be said about all sorts of other groups, marginalized groups. And so I do think that getting it into popular culture is one of the big pieces. I also think, as I pointed out at the beginning, it was when I got into my late 40s that, I've had a lot of privilege. I'm college educated, woke up or grew up in a wholesome, healthy family and all that kind of thing. I have had a lot of privileges. And then I suddenly recognized a privilege has been revoked here. And as more and more people move through that phase and are hearing our voices in the movement here, I think that there will be more push. I think that the avalanche will start rolling bigger, and it will be, I've always wondered, it's very curious about human resources and hiring practices, because I think not every person in human resources is under 40. Aren't people thinking, hey, this is me, or this is future me, when somebody's just turned down because they graduated way too long ago or something like that. So yeah, I just think this snowball will roll and we will get this thing normalized.
Okay. I'm with you. So before we come to the end of the podcast and I ask you the 3 questions that we ask everyone, can you share with folks again about where they can find you and more information about your projects?
You can find me and more information about my projects at growingandolder.com. Very tiny site right now. It's just the blog and the page about getting the artwork or ordering a yard sign or creating your own yard signs. You can also write to me there. There's a form on the website, or you can write to Margaret at growingandolder.com. Then I post on Instagram as Growing and Older, and I post on LinkedIn as Margaret McDonald. I know it's a common name, but I'm the one who was there first with the name Margaret McDonald. So that's my sort of handle on LinkedIn. But if you look for Margaret McDonald in Portland, Oregon, you'll find me. So love to see that.
Okay. So question number one. When you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown about you that you really like about yourself?
I think that getting really comfortable with myself is what has kind of been a surprising change and just continues to grow. I have always been, I'm ashamed to say it, I'm embarrassed to say it, I guess, always been kind of focused on my looks and good enough, bad, not good enough, and all of that. I've really absorbed the culture that way, not proud of it. And then over time, I have recognized now, like, meh, gray hair, wrinkles, a new jawline. This is the way things are. I read a book by Anne Lamott recently, and there was a character who was very old and was dying, and they talked a lot about his translucent skin. And I thought, yeah, let's just get interested. If we're here for the long run, let's get interested in what these changes actually are, rather than being embarrassed about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Question number two, and you maybe alluded to it already, but is there anything else that surprised you most about you as you have aged?
I think changing in general, I think, especially before I read This Chair Rocks, I had a lot of ideas about how we get set in our ways and people don't change very much as they get older. And then really recognizing now that's a mindset. I change plenty. I keep looking back and saying, oh, yeah, that's so different. I just feel like I know myself much better and didn't realize that I didn't know myself that well when I was younger. So, yeah, I have not yet read, is it Carol Dweck's book on
Connie's wig?
Oh, I'm thinking of growth mindset.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
Haven't read it yet, but the idea that our minds are very plastic. We continue to change.
Yeah.
And that's not going to, we're not going to stop changing. And it's been a surprise, but it's been wonderful.
Okay, and the last question. Is there someone that you've met or who has been in your life that has set a good example for you about aging, someone that inspires you to age abundantly, as we say around here?
Age abundantly. I love that so much. I didn't know my grandparents very well. And unfortunately, my parents actually died pretty young. They were 70 and 72. But I was thinking about my father toward the end of his life. And he had been a real go-getter when he was young. He had been probably a type A personality. And as he got older, and he knew he had a slow growing cancer, and he knew for a long time that the end was coming toward him. And he just got mellower and more interested in other people. And that was really his big thing. He wanted to share love and talk with other people and hear from other people. He shared about his spirituality, which I had never known about growing up. He told me, well, he unfortunately toward the end, he really needed a lot of morphine to deal with pain, but he asked for his wallet one day, and we said, oh, why do you need your wallet? And he said, I need $1.65 in exact change to get into heaven. And it's so funny because we had grown up never hearing anything about the man's spirituality or religion or anything like that. But he just gets so warm and loving over time and recognized this is what's important.
That's very cool. Thanks for sharing that story. And thank you, our listeners, for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging. And we want to hear from you. What's changed about you as you've aged that you love? What has surprised you most? And how do you define abundant aging? And who is your abundant aging hero or influencer? One more time, Margaret, where can folks find you?
growingandolder.com.
And you can join us at abundantaging.org to share your ideas. Thank you, Margaret, for the conversation, and until next time.
Thank you so much, Beth.